Hey everybody, welcome to Michael deMeng's Junk and Disorderly. So, in this podcast, we're going to explore some of the curious things that have happened to me as an artist, as well as some of the strange objects that I have collected and transformed into art. There'll be a few other things as well mixed in, but sit back and take a listen. This week's episode, Tales of Taradiddling, the Baron Munchausen story. Hey everybody, it is Michael deMeng and Junk and Disorderly, and I am here once again with my buddy, Gary Warren Niebuhr. Hi, Gary.
Hello, Michael. Good to be back on.
We were recently in Oaxaca together, and a buddy of ours, Wayne, said he really enjoys when we do movie talk, so we decided we would do movie talk again, because both Gary and I are movie people. Is that not true?
That is true. I tell you, I take these almost as class assignments. I do a lot of research and thinking about these films, which to some people would sound like it's painful, but to me, that's what makes doing these podcasts with you so exciting. I get to revisit films I love and do research on the internet, found out all this movie trivia stuff, and yeah, it's fun
Well,
for
it's
me.
the librarian in you, man.
It
I mean,
is.
you can
It is.
retire from being a librarian, but you can't get rid of it. Can't shake it.
Now,
Yeah, research guy. No, and I'm kind of the same way. I kind of, I can't say that I actively, I'm an active learner, but if I have a task, I like the process. I have to sort of create these tasks to explore things, which is part of the reason why I like going on art-wise tangents, because it forces me to actually explore things. So it's kind of a fun way to learn, a different way to learn. So our topic this time is a famous taradiddler. Do you know what that word is, Mr. Librarian?
okay, great. We're not 5 minutes into the podcast and I have to reach for my dictionary. No, I don't know what
Okay,
it is.
taradiddler. I have been accused of being a taradiddler more than once, and in public, in fact. But taradiddling is basically the act of embellishing. It's not. So somebody who adorns a tale, and it might be true, or it might have true elements in it, but it's one of those sort of tall tale sort of things, right? So today's topic is, I think, a rather historic taradiddler by the name of Baron Munchausen. Now, Baron Karl Friedrich. No, wait. That's not all. Baron Hieronymus Karl Friedrich von Munchausen, to be complete here, who is, we're going to talk about in particular two different movies, but those two movies, one in 1961, I believe, and then the other in the 80s, in 1988 by Terry Gilliam. Both are Baron Munchausen movies, but the original story came from 1785. So this is an old time story based on a real person. So Baron Hieronymus Karl Friedrich von Munchausen is not a made-up name, and it was sort of based on an actual German nobleman, a cavalry officer who served in the Russian army against the Ottoman Empire, and would tell these fantastical stories of war and strange things. But later came a book in about him that he was furious about, but it was basically exaggerations of these travel memoir. It was a travel memoir that was exaggerated, and it was a joke on him, which he hated to his dying day. I think he even tried to sue him. I don't know. Is that your research aligned with mine, Gary?
Yeah, as I understand it, Rudolf Erich Raspe was the author of these sort of folk tales about this real guy. And then eventually, like, the publishing history is like, don't put my name on that book. So,
Right,
like,
right.
the book kept being reprinted, but Rasp was like, don't put my name on that book. I don't want to get sued by the real Baron Munchausen. So, yeah, it grew legs. definitely as folk history, but it is based on a real person, which is kind of
So
cool.
so the books that Rasp wrote had just, I mean, they were anecdotes. They were like small stories. And have you read any of them, Gary? Did you read any of the stories from?
No, in fact, my schedule has been rather busy, which is an excuse everyone uses. But what I hope also is a goal for people who are listening to this podcast. I now have a goal where I'm after seeing both films again and doing the research and stuff, I'm like really encouraged. I'm sure they're available for free, copyright free on the
Yeah,
internet
yeah.
somewhere. I want to go and read, especially the one that's like, the one that would involve the journey to the moon and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I really do want to read them and see what they're like.
They're fun. I've read and audiobooked. They're available on both. But they're fun tales. I mean, short by and large. Most of the stories are very short in multiple stories. But and it's kind of funny. They open up. It opens up with this sort of an intro, and this is the story of Baron Munchausen. And so it's kind of like has this one paragraph intro of what happens in this crazy thing. So, to give a couple classic types of Munchausian incidents. So, for instance, um, and this is actually appears in both films of him um, catching a cannonball, and I think he said it was the Ottoman Empire hopping onto a cannonball, flying into the enemy camp, which explodes, but catching another cannonball on the way back. So that's one. Journey to the Moon, as you stated, and strange inhabitants are on there. There is an interesting thing where he gets stuck in a swamp and he ends up pulling himself out of the swamp by grabbing his ponytail, and he lifts himself up by grabbing his ponytail. Let's see. Oh, okay. One of the ones that I thought was pretty hilarious was he. I don't remember exactly, but I remember he was attacked by a bear, and so the way he defeated it, he reached inside and pulled the bear inside out, which is rather grim. But a really good one was he's out deer hunting, and he runs out of ammunition, and so he loads his musket with cherry pits. And he couldn't find the deer, only to find the deer later. I think it was, a year later, and it had cherry trees growing off its head, like, instead of antlers. So, um, so, not something that could be confused for reality. I would assume. I would assume. So,
But
I would definitely say that, yeah, you should read them, Gary. I think they're pretty fun. I think they're fun.
I'm not 100% sure on the dates. We are talking 1785, but when I was thinking about this, whether you're the Grimm's fairy tales or the Arabian Nights or whatever, it's definitely in that school, that idea of this. Um, there's a reality to all of it, but it's fantasy based. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, you have to play the fantasy game or you're not going to really enjoy them.
Yeah, yeah, they are. I'd say, putting it in the category of like fairy tales, like you say, it's exactly what it is. I don't know that it has a moral. Not that all fairy tales have a moral. Because maybe that's an interesting point of discussion because often fairy tales have some moral's not really the right word, not like an Aesop fable, but they often have some purpose. Don't go into the woods at night. Okay, that type of thing. And I'm not sure that Baron Munchausen has anything like that in it, though there's something that I will bring up later that I think it does have, something that has to do with, imagination that I think it does play off of. One thing I wanted to mention is Gustave Doré,
Mm.
who was the books, or at least some version of the books, have his wood engravings in there. Did the drawings for it, and back in the 19th century. And Gustave Doré was is a renowned. Well, I mean, he's not is meaning alive, but he is still known for these his illustrations and drawings and etchings and engravings, and did Dante Dante's Inferno and Don Quixote, and but he did a lot of the drawings for it, which a lot of the scenes that were in the movies are like directly out of the films, in particular the first film we're going to talk about. But
Yeah, I saw an image of Munchausen by Doré, and it looks like you're looking at a sketch of both actors who played the character.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's they stuck very true to that illustrated version of the stories.
because he's not necessarily I don't he's he's a womanizer, and he's very popular with the gals for sure. Um, but he wouldn't what you would be classify as a classically handsome man. He's he's no George Clooney. He's definitely I don't know. I just he doesn't he just he's one of those guys who has that personality who can charm anyone, I guess. So
Yep, there's a lot of rosebuds that
yes,
get passed on
yes,
to women that charms them despite the fact that he's got like an eagle's beak for a nose.
right,
So, yeah.
right, right. All right, so shall we move on to film number one, the fabulous Baron Munchausen, made in 1962. We'll talk a little bit about the director in a minute. This is from Czechoslovakia. Now, I was able to track this down on Criterion, which is pretty cheap streaming. I think it's $9, $10 a month or something. So even if you want one film, it's worth doing. But they have a great collection on Criterion. But it's Karel Zeman is the director. Now, Karel Zeman has often been referred to as the Ray Harryhausen of, well, it's not Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, because this is Cold War era stuff. So he was renowned for doing these animated movies. There's actually a museum in Prague that I've been to that is the Karel Zeman Museum, and it's very small, but it's right off the Karl Bridge, and it's got some of the things that he used to create weird spatial effects when you have like zero budget, as you would imagine a Czechoslovakian, behind the Iron Curtain budget. He had to be very creative, and so a lot of his stuff, dinosaur type stuff, and so a lot of crazy things. Anything you've learned about Karl Zeman?
Well, I was fortunate to see a documentary. I have a Janus Films collection, which
Mm-hmm.
has this movie and two others with it and a documentary. And it it reminded me a lot of Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton was one of those people like Zaman who's basically like, I stumble into making films, I have a vision. It would be much better if everybody just stayed out of my way. Because, you know, when you're talking about Keaton or Zaman, they worked for a studio. And in the case of Zaman, he stayed in a small, remote studio outside of the major city and only went to Prague occasionally to basically keep all the other crapola that was involved in this film studio from interfering with what he really wanted to do. And the good news for him, and you know, deservedly so, is when he broke through big time. I mean, for a while, he was big time stuff in Czechoslovakian filmmaking, which is terrific. And then, not unlike Keaton and some other people, as time came along, it passed him by. He had a certain way of making films, and that's how he wanted to make them. He had a crew around him that he loved, and they loved him, and they all had.
Well, and he even paid their wages when there were no wages to pay. Basically, I know.
Yeah, according to this documentary, he would shut down a film like this one, uh, whose name Fabulous Baron Munchausen. I was forgetting how this one was referred to. Fabulous Baron Munchausen. And like the day it closed down, he would start passing out sketches for the next film. And that was so that the overall film company couldn't lay off any of his workers or send them to work on other films because he felt their talents were really they so uniquely fit his style that he didn't want to lose anybody. And ultimately, what happened when people on his loyal crew suddenly decided, like, well, I'd like to animate a film myself, or, oh, I would like to direct a film myself. He had matriculated up into his 70s and 80s. He couldn't keep that crew together anymore. And that was pretty much the end of his film career. But
Now, so when I discovered him, it was actually when I went to Prague. I had never even heard of him. I'd never even realized that he had done Baron Munchausen version. And I'm in there all of a sudden. I see a T-shirt that's Baron Prasil, which basically is the word or the term they use in Prague or Czechoslovakia at the time for Baron Munchausen, the same thing. And I'm like, what is this? And then I started seeing some of the set designs for this. And I'm like, what the hell? I mean, because I don't know about you, Gary, but when I first saw this movie, I was like, I don't know that I've seen anything like this. Um, because I'll briefly try and describe it, and I'll let you kind of jump in. But the idea is like if you took a Gustave Doré etching, and then you took live actors and you inserted people in that, and then you added other practical special effects that are crazy things that mix sort of creatures and monsters and things that are made out of who knows what, and then animated versions of those things also, but it's all mixed together, but it all is sort of seamless. It's not like, oh, it's a guy in a cartoon. It's not like Mary Poppins. It doesn't feel like that. It's not the guy dancing with penguins. It's strange because the actors feel like they're part of the etching world, the etched world that that they inhabit. Would you not agree?
absolutely, I am not a film technician, so a lot of these things are from a purely amateur point of view. But again, in seeing that documentary, his crew, his studio, um, were masters at using matte, matte painting. And so you're right. It's like if they needed Baron Munchausen to walk across the desert towards a castle, you'd have the actor walking across the desert, walking towards a etching of a castle that was, when you see how they filmed it, it's like they they put the mat like 2 inches in front of the frame and the actor's like 300 yards
Right,
away. I mean,
right,
it's
right.
just crazy the way they do this because when it is done, it's all integrated into what appears to be like sort of like a surrealistic dream.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah.
which, if you again suspend your disbelief when you watch this movie, you start to think it's perfectly normal for them there to be drawn things with live action going on at the same time.
Well,
Plus,
there's a great scene like where he's riding a seahorse, not like we know it, but a horse with instead of its legs have fins on him. Has legs, but then it has fins on the end of them instead of hooves. And so you have the actor or at least a photographic representation of the actor, riding Baron Munchausen's riding through the underwater, with on this horse, and so it's this mixture of there's the photographic image, and then there's this drawn image. But you know what? Okay, so
well, just to finish that thought
yeah,
though, and then the whole scene is the capper on the scene is when the swordfish comes by with his uniform, drawn, and it
right, right,
floats over him, and the human actor has to reach up and take the drawing, and then by the time he gets it to himself, he's got a real coat. And meanwhile, you're watching this whole thing shot through a piece of what essentially would be almost like a beveled glass. So it
right.
makes you feel like you're underwater and there's bubbles going by. It's, it's
Well, and
It's
then
great.
I'm thinking of the Ottoman when they're in the Turks palace, or the Ottoman uh the Ottoman Turk palace, where they have their the what so we were talking about the etching. So, and the thing is, it's not limited to like the background. So what they did, I thought that was rather clever. So when I'm talking about etching, I'm thinking about, if you've seen drawings, especially older drawings where it's lines, right? You draw little lines and lines and crosshatch in some cases, but lines create the sense of depth, right? But when the outfits, or even for instance, the things that are actually in the set itself, not the matte stuff, not the painted scene, are actually painted in the same way as the background. So they're not, it's in the same etching style. So foreground, background, it's this nice completion of style that makes the world feel much fuller, as opposed to like, oh, that's the background. It's like, no, it's all engrossing.
Very early in Zeman's film, when Munchausen arrives there, he walks through a hallway to get to where the Sultan is, and it's just it feels like the camera is going down through the
Right.
various matte drawings, matte paintings of it's yeah, and you're thinking 1961 and you're watching this and you can't help but think like, how did he do that? It is pretty amazing. There's actually an image of that set in the documentary, and this set's maybe 20 feet long, and the camera's on the end, and then um, the mats are there. And of course, we're thinking the camera is moving down the hallway through all these painted things. And what's really happening is the camera stationary and the stuff is moving
Right.
past you.
Right.
I know I also saw a little scene with from a different film, but it illustrates Terry Gilliam, who we'll get to in a sec, his excitement. He was saying it's a man in a locomotive on a bridge. The smoke is pouring out of the locomotive. The locomotive's wheels are turning as it's going down the bridge. And then there's the human guy sitting in there where the engineer would be sitting, right? And Terry Gilliam's like, how the hell did he do that? Until I realized, the locomotive is stationary. The tracks are moving.
Right.
It's just
Right. Right. Right.
it's all about illusion in these
Yeah.
films. Yet you're watching a good and valid story and being entertained by all the energy of that story, but you can easily get drawn into the special effects and
Yeah.
be just amazed at what's going on.
My favorite scene is, such a minor scene, but it was so clever, I thought. There's a scene where they go to see the Sultan. And Baron Munchausen has a guy who, time is kind of a strange story, because it starts off with a rocket ship, so present day at the time, I guess, or future even, lands on the moon, and there's Cyrano who's telling the story. And then there's a bunch of other people, historic people on the moon, Baron Munchausen being one of them. They're having like a tea party up there. And they think he's a moon man. And so Baron Munchausen goes, "Oh, let me take you to the Earth," which somehow or another it ends up being back in time. I don't entirely understand. The time is very vague, and this is, I think, going to be an important topic when we get into these comparatively. But time is very vague in this story, and so he brings the Moon Man down, and they end up in the Ottoman, wherever they are, empire, and the Sultan. But there's a simple scene where they walk up to the Sultan, and the Moon Man, we'll call him, steps towards him, on a platform. And as he steps on this plank, all these spears move into the frame. Okay, so it's imagine like a whole bunch of guys with a camera, and all of a sudden your job is to hold these spears, and you're like, okay, move them forward when this guy steps forward, and pull them back when he steps away, right? And then, of course, you see sort of the cutout of the design, which is all sort of an animation thing of this mechanism that shows the innards of, as he steps on the machine, this automated spear device moves forward and threatens him. I don't know. It's a simple thing, but I just like, That's really fun.
You want to know my favorite scene?
Sure.
You already mentioned it. He rides the cannonball out
Right.
into the Turkish battle, and he takes careful notes to tell the general where all the soldiers are, and then hops under a different cannonball to fly back, right? Well, when he flies back, he gets to the fortress and he crashes through a window into a room where the moon man and his girlfriend are standing around watching all this. And when they back out of the room, the on, on the outside of the castle, you can just see the shape of his body and the cannonball where he
Oh,
came through
right.
the wall. It
Right.
looks like something out of a Roadrunner cartoon. And it
Right.
just makes
Right.
me laugh because it's just like the Roadrunner, like splat. I mean, the
Right. Right.
coyotes splat,
Right.
against that thing. But there's like this little cutout of Baron Munchausen busting through the wall in the window. And I don't know. I watched the movie twice. I laughed out loud both times. I just
Yeah,
think
it's
that
such
is
a
just
it's such
so
a fun
darn
movie.
funny.
So before we move on to the second version, is there anything else you want to talk about this?
Well, you have touched on it. The setup for these, we've set it up as based on the original folk tales of, and so you expect some framework that's um, real. I guess I don't know what I'm
Yeah,
searching for,
yeah,
but you're
yeah,
not going to get it here because of what you just mentioned. When you start watching the movie, you're like, what am I watching?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
you see these footsteps on the moon, and then the moon man, he's wearing an astronaut's thing. He's talking to actual historical literary characters, like you say, who are having like an Alice in Wonderland tea party on the moon.
Right, right.
And then Baron Munchausen finally, like, I actually said to my wife while we were watching this, I'm like, I might put the wrong disc in. You know, I did I, because there's three films in this case. Did I put the wrong? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, by the way, here's Baron Munchausen coming, and he's walking across the moon. And you're like, okay, all right, now things will settle down. No, they don't, because Baron Munchausen keeps calling this guy a moon man, and the moon man keeps going, I'm from Earth. But Munchausen's not even listening to him. He's like, I don't care. I'll take you to Earth and show you what Earth is. And he's like, I'm from Earth. And just so you know, you're not playing with reality. Finally, the guy says, I'm from Earth. And Munchausen says, no, you're not, because I've never seen you there.
Right, 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 right,
And the
right,
reality is,
right,
the entire Earth, if I've never come across your path,
right.
you can't possibly be from Earth. So, and then, of course, then your brain just explodes because they get in a little sailing ship. Off they go to fly to Earth. And,
Right. Sail through the stars to.
again, you have to suspend your disbelief. But if we're going to jump to the next film, I will continue to talk, which
Sure,
is
sure.
that film is an homage to the fact that there were stage productions of Baron Munchausen. What a surprise, in an era when people loved to go to theater, and it was sort of participatory theater, like Shakespeare was and stuff. There were a couple of versions, stage versions of the Munchausen tales. And that's how Terry Gilliam decided to open his version with
Yeah, that
the,
opening scene is great with the theater production with the
yeah,
low budget but really impressive low budget stage versions of
super
sea monsters, things
surrealistic
like that.
on
Yeah,
stage version.
yeah.
Great version of, like, I'd like to actually see that. I mean, today,
Right.
it was pretty good. Yeah, you have the wave thing and the giant whale coming on stage and everything. And it's not going well because the war is being waged around this city, and the theater company that's putting on these Munchausen is just trying to provide some relief. There's wounded soldiers there. There's, people in need of a little humor. And, you're like, okay, this is a little better than the Man on the Moon opening, I guess is what I'm
Right,
saying.
right,
It
right.
was a much more smoother transition, because essentially what happens is, you jump into the whole meta thing, because a very elderly Baron Munchausen walks into this theater company and goes, no, you're getting it all wrong. and
Yeah, like this is not that's not how the story went. What are you guys doing with my
yep,
legacy?
yep.
Yeah, yeah,
And then eventually he gets on stage, and when he starts to tell his truthful version of none of these tales are true, but his truth of these truthful versions, we suddenly just seamlessly go into the past.
yeah. We move into the
And
Sultan's palace,
it's
and the
that
true
whole
version
thing
is
of,
actually stranger than the play version.
well, and it's that whole problem with meta stuff, which is what makes it so exciting to experience. Is like, who's telling me this story? What
Right.
time period am I in? Am I in the play? Am I in the movie? Am I in some other memory? It's really brilliant, I think, opening.
Well, there are two really different types of movies here. Okay, so I should mention that Terry Gilliam, who gained initial fame doing the animation, and he was also a member of Monty Python, but he did the all the animations, which you definitely can see. You can see the influence that the Zeman version had on him because there's some elements of that in Zeman's film that you can see Terry Gilliam using later as a young director artist. But then you see the Monty Python stuff creeping in to into his version of Baron Munchausen. So I think it's kind of fun in terms of that sort of meta type of thing. But what's interesting to me, so the difference of films though, so whereas Karel Zeman's film is more like you're reading a storybook. You're inside of and there's no pretense that there's anything remotely realistic about this. Now, the story in the Terry Gilliam version, the 1988 version, it's realistically filmed in one way, but what happens is totally fantastical. It has multitude of fantastical elements. You go to the moon and giant sea monsters, and you go visit Venus, and you have all these things happening. But it's it's not you have the whole the tableau is not surreal. The stories and the things that happen in the stories are surreal. So it's a different sort of feel, I would say.
I agree 100%. Your use of the words like it is like when I was a child, and thinking back of the books I read, and Zeman's film is, you're right, it's almost like that. You turn a page, there's another illustration. You're writing your own film in your head while you're reading the folk tale in the book, Doré's, illustrations help. And you get to Terry Gilliam's version, and you're very much in the we've pushed on. We're now into the CGI. We're now into the a different kind of thing. That shouldn't mean it isn't equally as fascinating or sometimes absolutely amazing in how special effects are done. But that sort of folksy, yeah, that's kind of gone. And now we're into pretty much big, glitzy, almost Hollywood like filmmaking.
See, but what got me, what sold me on this when I was watching it, I remember the first time I watched it, and I was in the theater, and I saw it when it first came out, and I think what sold me on it was, in particular, one segment where he's trying to leave the moon. And so what he does is the moon is of course a crescent shape, at least when they're when they're departing it. And he ties a rope around the point of the moon of the crescent, to climb down. And of course, then they run out of rope, and so he cuts the top part of the rope so that he can add more rope down below. And of course, they fall. But as they're falling towards the earth, which you then see from an aerial perspective, like a satellite's view. It has the lines of the latitude and longitude lines drawn across it as they come plummeting into the Greek god Vulcan's lair and his disgruntled cyclopean machinists.
I bet you like those cyclopean machinists, knowing your art. Yeah, I was reminded of that when I watched the film. I'm like, from my older viewings of it, I'm not sure even saw those characters as much as I did this time. I was like, oh, look at those cyclopean masks.
Yeah, yeah, they were pretty cool. They were pretty cool.
And that's one thing you have to say about both Zeman and Terry Gilliam. And again, he's a major part of that documentary that I watched. They are both the kind of people who, when they make a film, they're not opposed to saying like, "Oh, I have this idea. Let's film that." "Well, nah, that's not quite right. Let's do it again." "Oh, what do all you guys think?" It's not just like one person's vision, but other people's visions as well. And they keep at it and keep at it and keep at it until they get it right. Now, like in the case of Zeman back in Cold War Czechoslovakia, he basically was working with minimal budget and they were inventing everything and doing it all by hand. In Terry Gilliam's world, he mentions in the documentary, yeah, I put some actors in front of a green screen and then 100 people work on making this scene look like something. It's very different from the way Zeman worked. But the problem, the sort of dark cloud that hangs over this movie is it was unfortunately made when the film company Columbia was being sold to Sony, and all the old projects were being abandoned, including his. He was in mid filming. So if that wasn't complicated enough where he'd become like an orphan director in this studio where they just kind of wanted to get rid of him, the budget was somewhere around 20 million and he was coming in somewhere around 40 million. So
Well, and he had, I mean, and a lot of that budget was probably, I mean, it had a lot of special effects, but also big stars in it. I mean, in particular, the Moon, the King of the Moon, Robin Williams, kind of like in his heyday, really, like comic heyday anyway, which is just, I mean, how much of that was ad libbed? I mean, I would venture to say probably 80% of that whole Moon Man. So the Moon Man of the Moon and the Queen of the Moon both have detachable heads from their body. So the Cartesian, what is it? Wouldn't it be Descartes? The body and the mind? I don't know. Anyway, so it's of that age of reason thing of the mind and the body, and so he could depart, so his head could leave, so that he could pursue intellectual matters, and the body could do its earthly things. But what I love about that scene is they have like these Doric columns, like their head is like they have these sort of column toppers as part of their skulls. They look like crowns, but it's actually part of their heads. It's just so non sequitur. I don't know. It's just bizarre.
this is why I love to do the research because supposedly now, according to what I research, the King of the Moon was going to be played by Sean Connery. And let's just say things didn't go well. Sean Connery was kind of like, part's not big enough and it's a stupid movie and I don't want to do it. Evidently, he was not good friends with anybody in Monty Python and whatever. So, sort of in desperation, they asked Robin Williams to do it. I don't know if Terry Gilliam knew him or any of the other, like Eric Idle knew him or whatever. But I had to write this down because it's so cool. Um, in the credits, Robin Williams is listed as Ray D, the initial D, Tuto, which
Hey,
is Italian for um, King of Everything.
King of Everything, right?
So
Which is
why
what he
wasn't he?
refers to himself as King of the Moon. He refers to it as like Re Tutto, King of Everything, but you can call me Ray, which of course is the old play off of the you can call me Ray for those of you who remember that.
So why did that happen? Well, it's according to Gilliam, it says the deal was we couldn't use William's name because his agent said, quote, we don't want you pimping his ass for your film. So this is how like Hollywood works, I guess, right? I mean, sometimes it works smoothly and sometimes you wonder how films even get made.
Yeah.
Because the female, the queen, is I'm not familiar with her because I don't recognize her from many films that I've watched, but it's Valentina Cortese, and she is like a big, giant Italian. She had a long,
Yeah, I did some.
glorious
I know.
career in
It was like
Italian film. Yeah,
I
and
was kind of surprised too because I saw that she had this long list of credits, but they were all like Italian films.
yeah, and she
Yeah.
basically, while Robin Williams is doing his Robin Williams thing, floating around with his floating head, she's over here, basically just in love with the Baron. She's another one of those women who's in
Even
love
though
with the
she's like
Baron.
the size of King Kong compared to the Baron, which is
Yeah,
yet
yeah.
he's
They're
still able to woo her nonetheless,
they're
even with that.
monstrous, and he's a little tiny man. But then
Well, and
I believe she's the same woman who's in the theatrical company,
right. So
right?
a lot of recurring things. So for instance, Uma Thurman, a very young Uma Thurman,
18
plays
years old.
right, plays the goddess Venus, which is another sweet scene where they recreate Botticelli's Birth of Venus as she emerges, from her shell, almost exactly they recreate the whole Birth of Venus scene, in in Vulcan's lair, who's played by Oliver Reed, you know.
Oliver Reed, another huge
Yeah,
star,
yeah,
a big star at the time.
yeah.
Yep.
Sting
But
Sting even makes a cameo,
he
but
does.
very very briefly, but
Before we get off of Uma, though, um, that's another example in this film of where one thing we haven't mentioned when you talk about the meta, where are we, who's telling the story, where are we, is Munchausen keeps changing age.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
not ever a young man, but he's maybe 40 to 50-ish
50, yeah,
at his
I'd say 50.
youngest. And then he looks like a really
Ancient.
old,
Yeah.
ancient, with warty guy. Well, when he's like he's holding out the rose to Venus and Venus is falling in love with him, he looks like a frog. I mean, you're just like, what
Right.
is this? It's just kind of like sort of a little creepy to see this, Harvey Weinstein guy and
Right,
this really
right,
young
right,
actress,
exactly.
and you're just
Yeah,
in our day and age now, you're just kind of like creeped out by that.
yeah.
But anyway, you were going to mention,
Oh no, the cast of this. I mean, it's such a great cast, and I often wonder how how do you get Oliver Reed to take the part of that part? But it's such a it's I don't know. It's just I love this movie. It's one of those movies that I think you either love it or you just don't. And you have to I sort of take it episodically. Even though it's a film from beginning to end. Um, uh, it does seem to me like a series of little vignettes, not dissimilar from the actual tales. It's like, oh, and this happens, and this happens. And there's a plot line, and that's even true with the Czechoslovakian version too. There's a plot line, kinda, but it's really like, okay, here's another fantastical tale. Here's one that takes place in the Sultan's palace, and here's one that takes place, blah 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 blah. But and that I think is the essence of what the Baron Munchausen stories are. Strange tales, and there might be an overarching narrative, but I think that's that's kind of the nature of it, which I think this film captures really well. Maybe not quite to the degree that the Zeman version does, but it does still have that.
I mean, I have to admit that in the era that we're living in today, I mean, don't want to get all political, but there is a conflict going on in the Middle East right now between what is essentially European powers and the people who live in the Middle East. That's that's what the Baron Munchausen
Yeah,
stories
it's
are. They're
not.
based on
It's
the
the
glorious,
Ottomans versus, yeah,
yeah, the glorious conquering of, the evil Sultan in the Ottoman Empire by, of course, the more appropriate Western white guy in the military uniform and whatever. So that is kind of the overarching story of both these films, that
yeah,
he's fighting, this battle, but you can really tell the difference between the two because in the Zeman film, that's all part of the folktale, where by the time you get to the Gilliam version, you're post-Vietnam, you're post the anti-hero film era. And so you have this uh, uh, Jonathan Pryce character
Right, right,
who was referred to as the right ordinary
right,
Horatio. He's like the government leader, but he's the right ordinary. He's not anything
right,
all
right.
that special.
Man of the people.
But he's the one who Sting only has like a 2 minute vignette in this film. He comes in and they say to the right ordinary character played by Jonathan Pryce, this is a great hero. He just did wonderful, marvelous things, and he saved a whole bunch of people's lives. And and you expect him to pin the medal on his chest, and instead, the right ordinary Horatio
Ratio.
Jackson says, "Okay, take him out and execute him." Because we can't have anybody doing all this good stuff. It'll make the rest of the soldiers feel bad. I mean, it's almost like a Groucho Marx line.
Well, and
Really.
see now there in essence, I think you've just hit, I think, the sort of one of the key differences between the two films, and that is the point of perspective, because where Terry Gilliam's is a critique on, what is, well, this is something logical. This is the logical world, the rational world, and it's a critique on the rational world when rational world is pushed to the point of irrationality. Where things, well, if we do this and we tweak things here, then it's sort of like the layers of bureaucracy, and how that, to assure these things to happen, we do this, we follow order, we follow. And whereas Baron Munchausen in that 1988 version is disorder, it's the imaginary, it's the fantastical, and that threatens order, even if order doesn't make any sense, even if it's stupid, like executing a guy who just helped your cause, right? Or the premise of, well, we can't attack the Turks today because it's Wednesday. That was the thing, right? So, well, we're being attacked. Why don't you fire on them? Because it's Wednesday. Because these rules are in the way, right? Now, the Zeman version is different. It has none of that. It's not really a critique on that. It really is more of about it's a fantasy. It's perhaps it's more about imagination and not really a dark critique that Gilliam's is. I would say would be the big difference between the two.
Yeah, I agree. There is a charm, a folktale charm to the first version. The second one is more contemporary for us, more
Well,
dark,
cynical.
more messagey, but still the same fantastical adventures, just maybe for a slightly different purpose.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I I actually have to say something though. I totally forgot. But you're right. The Gilliam film opens up with, we had in the Zeman thing, we had those steps on the moon and whatever. And the Gilliam film opens up. There's this like scene, you can tell you're in the past, right? And the banners are smoke and the soldiers, and the title card says Wednesday.
right, right,
It doesn't say like what year or whatever.
right,
It just
right,
says
right,
Wednesday. That
right.
is
Which is,
so Monty Pythonish right
yeah,
there. I
yeah,
mean, he learned well from his years with Monty Python.
yeah.
That is hysterical. Yeah, like we're supposed to know what Wednesday it is. Yeah, anyway, very
Yeah,
funny.
because I mean, I think that let me. This is one thing I wanted to mention. So with the Zeman version, what that film, not entirely, there's some element of it that reminds me of Jean Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast, and um, and I know that part of it is the Beauty and the Beast version, which if people haven't seen the Beauty and the Beast, and we should talk about it one of these days because I love that film. Beauty and the Beast. It's just a glorious surreal, not totally surreal, just elements of surrealism. And it certainly doesn't have the encapsulating artistic feel that Zeman's Baron Munchausen has in terms of style. But there's something about the nature of the storytelling that I think is similar. It's sort of like, and it might be the way how the Jean Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast opens up with talking about the childhood open sesame. He has this little card show up and talking about the word how a child's open sesame to the world is once upon a time, and how those are magical words. And I think that the 1962 version is really the same thing. It's a once upon a time sort of tale. It's like, oh, take me for a ride. I'm going to go in here. And there'll be highs and lows, very different in terms of that from Terry Gilliam, I think.
Yeah. I agree with that. Zeman's initial sort of entree into filmmaking, because he didn't come out of school like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. He worked for a shoe manufacturer and all sorts of other things. He actually slid in it by doing advertising. But the reason why his ads were popular was because at home he was doing little puppet shows that he was filming in stop action kind of thing. And I think that joy in just something so simple like little puppet characters and whatever,
Right,
that
right.
childhood thing is what imbues that whole movie. And by the time you get to Terry Gilliam, his films are full of the things that influenced him. I mean, he was well aware of Zeman. He was totally in love with Ray Harryhausen. He had spent a decade with Monty Python. I mean, he's full of enough stuff to make a movie like this and make it well. I think the saddest thing about Terry Gilliam's version is when stuff like the budget and the Hollywood struggles and whatever put a stinketh on something, it
Right.
stinketh.
Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
doesn't. If you just step back and watch that movie, you're like, this is a great movie. How could this
Yeah.
not have made it
Yeah.
only made $8 million off a $40 million budget. They only printed 117 prints for distribution in the United States. And like Terry Gilliam says, an art house movie that nobody wants to watch, they print 400 prints. They only printed 117 copies of his film. So how could it make any money? It wasn't playing anywhere.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Europe, where they had plenty of copies, it was making a ton of money. But there was the stinketh upon it, and
Yeah.
people really should revisit this movie. They really
It's
should.
fun. I mean, it's just fun. I mean, even if you look at it like a matinee type of film, it's just a fun movie to watch. But I think that especially if you decide to do a double feature, I don't know, it might be a little too much Munchausen for one afternoon, but nonetheless, I think viewing it together. Now, the question I have, back to taradiddling, because we'll come back to the original character. What do you think of the difference or the relationship between exaggeration and myth making? So we'll go profound here. Do you see any? I mean, how do those two things relate? Because myths are, I mean, by the very nature, by the very term used, are exaggerations or things pushed beyond reality, right? Versus exaggeration, which certainly was what the early version of Raspa's versions of Baron Munchausen was. But your take, Senor Gary.
Well, I think this is a delightful mix of both. I mean, I think everything that Munchausen does in his tales is all related to some other kind of imagination feature, like the man in the moon, or
Right.
you know, um, the whale that swallows you, the biblical story of the whale that swallows you, or there's all these things like this. But layered on top of it is a guy, if I met him, I probably wouldn't like him. And
Right.
that
Right.
is
Right.
that
Right.
is a self-made myth man. I mean, he's writing his own myth, right?
Right.
So it isn't like we're looking back through the past at a gentleman and going like, whoa, and no, this is a guy alive telling you about, in fact, one, one of the, again, little inside Monty Python delightful little things is Eric Idle is one of his minions in
Right.
the Terry Gilliam movie. And
Speedy, super fast.
at some point, Baron Munchausen is like face full right in the camera, but you can see Eric Idle's just like in the background over his shoulder. And Baron Munchausen goes, well, I'm going to tell a pompous tale about how good I am. And you can see Eric Idle over his shoulder goes like, oh no, not again.
Right.
It's just like,
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
It's
even the
like,
characters in the film are telling us this is a pompous ass myth making man
yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think you do have that balance. I think you get your full on folk tale, wonderful things, but it's balanced with this guy who's
Well, and I think if you were to take it as and I know that you don't really hear the Baron Munchausen being referred to as a mythical being, like in the terms of, obviously myths or old religions and things like that. But if you were to take the character and look at it, it has to do with, I think, if you were to analyze it more metaphorically, it's about the ability to solve problems, about the ability to, in his case, use imagination to solve problems, to say, oh, here's something interesting. And that's one of the things, especially the early tales, like when you think of like, okay, so I'm going to shoot a deer with cherry pits. And you think, now, of course there's a cherry tree growing out of its head. You think of just these strange artistic consequences, things that you can only do in art, I think, where this, well, we'll go here. So it follows logic, but not the same kind of logic in the age of reason, right?
I think you're really dead on because the problem solving that goes on in the filmmaking behind the scenes, now that we've studied it, we know and we see what they struggle with is one thing. But that's also partially the message in the movie. I'm thinking of the scene in the 62 version where Baron Munchausen is in the ship and he's surrounded by the Spanish Armada.
Or
There's
that
like
no, the well, the was it Spanish or was
yeah,
it
no, I'm making that up.
whatever?
It's
Yeah,
yeah,
they
it's the
were armadas
Ottoman.
of
The
what did
Ottoman,
yeah,
yeah, is around them, and things look very dire. And I think the voiceover narration is like things look very dire.
right, right,
But what they forgot is that anytime there's a problem, there is a solution. And Baron Munchausen gets everybody on the ship
right, because he's
smoke
on a
their pipes.
right. They're a tobacco ship, I believe. Right,
They
right.
smoke their pipes, and suddenly they've got a smoke screen so that when the Ottoman ships start to shoot, they fly over his ship and sink each other
Yep,
because they
yep,
don't know who they're shooting at. There's a solution to every problem, is the message with Baron Munchausen. You mentioned it. He's stuck on the moon. It's a crescent moon. We'll just tie a rope around the
right,
top
right.
sharp edge and crawl down. I mean,
Or one of my favorite lines is, I have found that a modicum of snuff can be most efficacious when he's stuck inside the whale, at least in the play version. And then, of course, the whale sneezes and he goes
yep,
shooting out the
yep.
modicum of snuff can be most efficacious. So, but, and I think, yeah, I think that's, to me, that's what the story is all about. Anything we
So,
missed? Anything
yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I have trivia for our
oh,
guests.
okay, here we
You
go.
and our
Trivia.
guests.
Munchausen
First,
trivia.
first thing I want to mention is you mentioned watching both Munchausen films in a day, but I did not know this until now. I'm not sure how I missed this, but Terry Gilliam considers his three films a trilogy of imagination. That's the title, them trilogy. And the three films are Time Bandits from
Right.
1981, another really great,
Yeah.
surreal, weird film. Brazil
Brazil. Yeah.
from 1985, which is another really great,
Yeah.
bizarre, and of course, the one we talked about. And the idea is Time Bandits is man is young, Brazil is man at middle aged, and now Baron Munchausen is Man in Old Age. That's the trilogy of
Huh.
imagination. So if you ever want to have a day of surrealism, just chuck up all three films and watch them, and would be an interesting day. All right, what else can I tell you? This is why, you had me do this research.
That's
I
right.
was
Because you've researched it.
fascinated by this. I am not going to be able to pronounce her name. The actress who played Princess Bianca in the 1962 film is Yana Brakova, I will say, Brejchova,
Okay.
Kova, because it
Sure.
has the
Why not?
accent on the
Yeah.
end. Bah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was like, who is this woman? Well, as it turns out, besides having a long running career, from 1958 to 1962, she was married to Milos Forman, who
Oh,
eventually leaves Czechoslovakia,
Amadeus and
comes
yeah.
to
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
And how appropriate on the day after the Oscars, because that's when we're talking here, the day after the Oscars, he won one for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest
Right.
and
Right.
one for Amadeus, as he
Yeah.
mentioned. So
Yeah.
an interesting little bit of trivia. And my last little bit of trivia is in the Terry Gilliam version, the tiny Gustavus guy is played by an actor named Jack Purvis.
Right.
And Jack Purvis started out as a musical comedy double act team. He played the mouth organ and the vibraphone, and his partner played the trumpet. And eventually, his partner and him went off to Hollywood to audition for a film that was being made called Star Wars.
Ah.
Both these men are small people. Well, his partner is Kenny Baker.
Oh,
They took
sure.
one look at Kenny
Yeah.
Baker and they went, "You're going to be R2D2."
Yeah. Right.
Well, Jack Purvis was kind of like, "Oh, he got the good part." Well, they're like, "No, no, don't go anywhere. You're going to be in the next three Star Wars films. You are going to be the lead Jawa."
Oh,
So when you
right.
see that
Right.
guy coming
Right. Right.
out,
Right. Right. Right.
that's Jack Purvis from this film. And eventually he is like the king of the Ewoks.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I did not know
Isn't
that.
that
Yeah,
interesting?
I think he
So
was also, and I think he might have also been in Time Bandits too, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not
oh yes,
100% of that.
in
Yeah.
yes, he had a rather tragic car accident that left him quadriplegic, and
Oh,
so
wow.
Gilliam had talked about making a sequel to Time Bandits, but it never happened because he lost actually both his small people had little tragedies, and he lost his cast to do that. So, but anyway, there's your trivia to take away from our podcast here. It's amazing when
Trivia for trivial storytelling,
it never ceases to amaze me that when you dig into these things, you're like, really? Really?
Well, part of that I think is like there's how many people I mean, how many people does it take to make a film anymore? I mean, these days in particular. I mean, it's tens of thousands practically
And,
easily,
and
when the credits roll by. It's not like, the one card you used to see back in, 1932. This is everybody involved in the movie. I mean, now it's, goes on for, 20 minutes. And so with that amount of people involved with telling a story, there's going to be lots of good juice.
and yet here you and I sit, just the two of us, talking to each other.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Where's my makeup? I feel like Milton Berle. Makeup.
I know. I feel a little pasty. I need a touch up. My nose is shiny.
I should share with our listeners that every time we do this, I do change my costume. So I'm not wearing the same shirt on every podcast.
Given it's audio, I think that'll matter. That'll matter a lot. That'll matter a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Gary. Well, I think a really good topic, really fun topic that we had about a master taradiddler, and you learned a word today,
I did.
which surprised me that you did not know the word
I think you
taradiddling.
should get T-shirts made.
Yeah, yeah, taradiddlers. Yes, the Taradiddler Club. It's got a version of the Liars Club, I think. But yeah. All right, Gary. Well, look forward to chatting with you again sometime soon. Hopefully, we'll come up with something to talk about, I'm sure. But
And
always a
thank you for
pleasure.
hosting, my friend. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about good movies. This is always so much fun.
Yep. Yep, me too. All right, everybody, thanks for listening to Junk and Disorderly, where you can see me and often Gary, and we'll talk about stuff, and I'll talk about stuff on my own, and other people will talk about stuff. I don't know, unusual things, usually related to art. But thanks for listening. See you later.